All right, let's turn our attention now to a stock in an industry that has been at the core of this rally, and that, of course, is energy. XLE up about 30% year to date. Shares of Exxon Mobil have done quite a bit better than that, up about 45% year to date. Over the weekend, Yahoo Finance editor-in-chief Andy Serwer wrote about the future of Exxon in his latest newsletter. And Andy, I think Exxon is just at such an interesting point in its corporate history because, as you note, they themselves know what is next for fossil fuels. But it is interesting that now it's all kind of turning their direction. I was reading something this morning that the argument is basically in an economic recovery, we don't do new things. We default to what had worked. And obviously, fossil fuels, oil, all that is a core part of the economy today. And so, you wrote a lot about this. I'm just curious how you think the future will unfold based on the way that the post-pandemic recovery is unfolding so far.
No doubt, Myles, as you guys have been discussing this morning and over the previous couple of days, Exxon and the cyclical stocks are enjoying an upswing. And, that's because of an anticipated economic recovery coming out of the pandemic. But the question is this nothing more than a head fake for investors in Exxon, which of course has always been one of the most iconic companies in America for a century and a core holding in so many investors' portfolios. And sure, yeah, the stock is up over 40% year to date, but over the past 5 years, it's down 28% when the S&P is up 90%. And this secular decline in oil, of course, speaks to the notion that we are weaning ourselves off of fossil fuels. And this puts Exxon in a really tough position. They basically have two choices, you guys. One is to go green and to go into renewables, which is what BP and Shell, the European majors, are doing, wind, solar, et cetera. The other is to wind down the business and stick with oil and gas. And that obviously is a between a rock and a hard place. It's not really much of a choice. And the stock yields, even with this rally, you guys, it's still yielding 6.2%, which is telling you something.
Andy, it's stunning for me to see Exxon in this position. I'm sure it's stunning for you as well. But, to those alternatives for Exxon that they could take, essentially two paths, are they inclined to go down the route of alternatives? It's hard to imagine them slowly winding themselves down.
Yeah, they're sort of doing both right now, Brian. But their green initiatives have basically been carbon capture and carbon sequestration, which is basically, recycling carbon and putting into the ground. It's not going whole hog into solar or wind like the Europeans. So it's not that much of a green strategy. But, it was shocking. Just this past week, Darren Woods, the CEO, said, they agree with the Paris Climate Accords. I mean, you could never imagine Rex Tillerson saying something like that, and never mind his predecessors. So, Tillerson sort of ended up going that way a bit. I should be clear about that. But his predecessor, Lee Raymond, for instance, never would have had trucked with that at all. So, they do have some projects that are very high quality, like in Guyana, for instance, that are looking good. But they have such high overhead that they can't be as nimble as sort of the smaller independents. Well, they're the big independents, but they're smaller relative to majors like, say, ConocoPhillips or Occidental.
Andy, of course, there is some activist interest in this company from the likes of Jeffrey Ubben, from Engine Number One, which is a newer sort of upstart activist fund. I mean, the thing is, what they seem to be pushing for is also sort of this middle murky. It's not clear to me exactly what big picture change they want for Exxon.
Yeah, it's a little unclear to me too, Julie. And Jeffrey Ubben is very interesting because he basically threw away the capitalist model when he got out of his Value Act, the hedge fund, last year, and said Elizabeth Warren is right. And now he wants to spend the rest of his life affecting change at big industrial companies, in particular oil companies. And so he was able to get himself onto the board of Exxon. Engine Number One is not necessarily supporting that because they think that Ubben is not going to take the company far enough. And their slate of directors, I think, really does want to turn the company into much more of a green endeavor. However, the margins in solar and wind are just not the same as big oil. is used to. And the other thing is, having expertise in oil and gas does not translate to having expertise in solar and wind. They'll say, oh, we know how to do these big projects, but it's really not the same kind of thing. And so it's not clear to me that these activists are providing Exxon with a holy grail playbook going forward. And so, again, as one of my sources in the story said, this company is in a very, very tough spot.
And Andy, very quickly, before we let you go, we talked previously on this program about Exxon, and I said, well, the point of a company is for them eventually pay out dividends and it winds down and all the capital gets returned to shareholders. Does that seem like a future for Exxon? They just send the dividend out, buy back all the shares, and they just sort of wind it down for existing shareholders, right?
I think that's a very strong possibility, although Jeff Ubben said, that's the chicken strategy, which is buying back stock like that. And so he's, in theory, going to be against that. They are supporting that dividend, though, which is $15 billion a year in cash, Myles. It's a lot of money, but this is still a very big company with, a $250 billion market cap. So there's still a lot of believers out there.
Yeah, fascinating case study for. I'm sure there's kids in B school right now arguing, kind of both sides of this, and that maybe that is one approach that a management team could take. All right, Yahoo Finance editor in chief Andy Serwer, appreciate the time this morning.